Measure A was supposed to improve freeways and transit with $18 billion. Turns out it never would have raised that much, and SANDAG staff knew it. Mexican nationalism is on the rise as Mexicans are offended by talk from the Trump administration. And as Edison starts burying nuclear waste on the coast, Congressman Darrell Issa introduces a bill to move the toxic stuff. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer, and joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today, our reporter Andrew Keats, a Voice of San Diego. Good afternoon, Andy.
How you doing, Mark?
Good to see you again today. KPBS Metro reporter Andrew Bowen. Hi, Andrew.
Hey, Mark.
Sandra Dibble, who covers the border region for the San Diego Union Tribune. Hi, Sandra.
Hi, Mark.
And Union Tribune watchdog reporter Jeff McDonald. Hi, Jeff.
Hello, Mark.
Good to have you back again today. Well, in the months leading up to the November election, San Diego voters were urged to back Measure A, a sales tax hike for transportation projects. Officials at SANDAG, the Regional Association of Governments, pushed it, saying it would raise $18 billion. But that number, in fact, was billions more than Measure A was likely to raise. SANDAG staff knew that, but kept it to themselves. Andy, this was kind of a jaw-dropping story here. First, tell us how SANDAG got this forecast so wrong, and kind of starts with projections for an earlier tax and a similar tax hike, right?
Sure. So they use the same basis for all of the modeling that they do, all the forecasts that they do. So that model that they use for the forecast that became the tax extension in 2004, Transnet, and the one that became Measure A, all had the same basic flaw. And that basic flaw is they assumed everyone in San Diego was going to get much more rich than there was any real historical evidence for. The historical rate of the increase in our wages is something like 0.69%, and they assumed that it was going to be in the future would start increasing at about 1.3%, so almost double the amount of raise. And then from there, it's a pretty simple series of events. If everybody gets more rich faster than there's any reason to expect, then everyone spends more money than they ever have before. And if everyone spends more money, then we generate more tax revenue. So this was discovered about a year before the Measure A was ever voted on by anyone, and it caused panic from SANDAG staff.
All right, so we've got the election coming up in November of 2016. The year before, as you say, the fall of 2015, this was known. And how did it create panic? How was it? How did it come up within the organization?
You had one senior regional modeler who sent to his supervisor the newly hired chief economist Ray Major and said, basically just said, here's some numbers. And they exchanged emails a couple times before the new chief economist Ray Major said, wait, am I understanding this right? And just laid out what I just said. And he said, yeah, you've got that right. And the chief economist responded, OMG, entire email. Next guy said, wait, he said, I think I can think of another three-letter acronym that we could use. And the guy responded, WTF. So we're talking about real concern right away. They immediately understood the implications. And then from there, they go on for about a month trading specific emails and putting together charts, refining the data, building a case, knowing all along that this is going to produce tax revenue expectations that are beyond anything that's supportable by the historic performance of San Diego's economy. They put it all together in a presentation, and they took it to SANDAG's chief executives and said, here's what we found. And I want to be very clear about this. The implications were explicitly spelled out in this presentation, that this had major effects on Transnet's revenue expectations that were already being felt, and that it would be applied to Measure A. So
you had the real-life experience with Transnet and then this speculative thing on the proposal, but they're in the midst of a campaign now. They're trying to sell the voters here in this region, hey, vote for this Measure A because it's going to be $18 billion, and we're going to do all these wonderful things to improve freeways and transit and everything else.
Well, in fact, at this point, they weren't yet in a campaign.
Okay.
This was months ahead of that measure. Now, they had already been contemplating this measure. There had already been discussions and negotiations among the board, but it had not been finalized. This was in December 2015 that executives at SANDAG were made aware of this. It wasn't until April 2016 that the board voted on a specific measure that relied on that $18 billion number that they had been alerted was unrealistic.
Okay, and so they had those months before they were out there campaigning and saying, oh, 18 billion, it's coming, vote for this, support this, but they didn't do anything about it.
They didn't do anything about it. They didn't tell the oversight board that was created specifically to watchdog Transnet, and they didn't tell any of the board members, or at least according to what I know, what was in the emails I received, and what board members are saying. None of the board was made aware of this. So at that time, though, you make a minor adjustment, it's barely even a news story, right? It doesn't become a major thing until you go to voters with it.
Right. So instead of 18 billion, we're talking about what? Maybe 14 billion, something more realistic,
yeah.
Which is a lot of billions among friends. It adds up to real money, doesn't it, Andrew?
Right. So this measure was going to pay for a lot of new infrastructure in San Diego County, and it was a mix of freeway widenings, connectors, streets and roads, and public transit, new services. And one of the interesting things on the project list for Measure A was a lot of the same projects were also included in the 2004 Transnet extension. And with these new revelations, it seems clearer now than ever that Measure A was largely meant to just backfill some of the projects that could never actually get built on the timeline that they had originally planned for the 2004 tax measure that was approved. So, there was also in Measure A, there was this priority corridors program that was meant to sort of fast track some of the most important projects, and SANDAG said we're going to be able to build these within 15 years. But they gave themselves this very convenient out to say, well, if the economy goes down, if we're not getting enough revenue, then we can sort of vote to delay these priority projects. And these revelations seem pretty damning.
Okay. Now, I'll throw this out to both of you. In as far as what you see from the board and how this all came about, the various elected officials who sit on SANDAG's boards really weren't made aware of this. They didn't know.
I have no evidence that they were made aware of it. I talked to the chairman of the board, Ron Roberts. He said specifically that he wasn't and that he should have been. Now, whether there's 19 board members, I can't say definitively that no one knew, but I have no evidence that anybody knew.
All right.
Well, given they've withheld this information from the people they serve, is there any accountability forthcoming from the staffers that were responsible?
So far, there doesn't seem to be. They had SANDAG had their annual retreat this week in the Barona Casino out in Lakeside. All of the board members and even some people who aren't on the board but might potentially be on the board in the future are out there. There were certainly discussions about this. There was certainly some hand-wringing and some hand wrapping about what should happen, but no one talked about any specific accountability measures like you just discussed.
All right, and we're going to get into a moment about what some other things that were discussed going forward from that. But credibility with voters, is that a big deal, or are most people really not aware of SANDAG and what it does?
I think we in the media sometimes have to assume that people don't even know who their city council or member or mayor is, much less what SANDAG does.
Right.
So, I think the danger with losing credibility is not necessarily with the average voter who doesn't know what SANDAG is. It's more a danger in losing credibility among all of the advocacy organizations, nonprofits, political parties, other sort of agencies that will or will not endorse a future tax measure that SANDAG may or may not propose.
Support them on what they want to do.
And just one piggybacking on that, not only that, and I think that's all very true, but you don't need to be aware of this right now for it to matter the next time it's on the ballot. Right. There's going to be an opposition campaign, and the ads write themselves at this point.
Well, they'll use it as a club to beat you with.
And Measure A had opponents on the left and the right, and I think they're really feeling vindicated by this.
Well, now, you mentioned credibility. I'm going to set up a bite we have. You interviewed Ron Roberts, county supervisor on that board. Let's hear what he said about credibility.
The public has a right to be concerned when they hear things like this, and that's why we need to be able to identify precisely how and what happened. But the broader public wants these improvements. That's the one thing that we know. Whether SANDAG's in a position to deliver those, or whether it's done by two different other regional bodies, remains to be seen.
All right, Andrew, if SANDAG isn't paying for these big regional projects and all this money, who might? And you had a story today about how they may scale back and go in a different direction.
Yeah, so, cities and counties have the authority to tax their residents. They can use that tax money how they see fit. And they certainly do that for roads and things like bike lanes, open space preservation, other things that were in Measure A. They can also form joint power agreements, so a couple of cities join together and build some infrastructure together. SANDAG has such a huge role in the logistical planning of transportation in every sort of aspect that it's difficult to imagine any future tax measure in which SANDAG had no involvement whatsoever. There has been discussion of MTS crafting its own tax measure. MTS operates public transit but doesn't actually plan it or is not involved really in a serious way with the funding of it. That is very much in the idea phase. One thing that speaks in that favor is MTS covers most of South County, and that's where Measure A actually got the most support and where most public transit in the county already exists. But the MTS Legal Counsel has researched that and has found that it's going to be pretty complicated. They're going to need new authority from the state legislature, and there are a lot of other logistical questions to resolve.
All right, I've got one last bite here from Rod Roberts talking about subgroups possibly raising money for transportation.
We need to take a look. If there is a sub-region, for instance, take North County, that says we want Highway 78 so bad, all the cities along that corridor, they don't have to have anybody else participating. They can say, these 4 or 5 cities, we're all going to agree, whether it's a joint powers agreement or whatever. They can do that.
All right, a couple seconds left on this segment. What kind of reaction are you getting to all this story and this revelation?
I've heard quite a bit of feedback. Certainly there's a lot of people who are appalled, some people who maybe are even appalled enough to do something about it, but so far, we'll see how it goes. Okay, well, we will indeed. Thank you very much. Great story. Well, in a few short weeks, President Donald Trump has succeeded in spawning a surge in patriotism, a fierce loyalty to country and culture among Mexicans. From his border wall and threats of import taxes to his treatment of Mexico's president, Trump has proven adept at drawing Mexicans together from Cancun to Tijuana. Sandra, start there in Tijuana. What's the reaction down here? It's only been 3 weeks. Doesn't seem like it's that short a time to President Trump and a lot of his actions and statements.
Well, I started noticing something from a lot of my Facebook friends started posting Mexican flags on their profile pictures on their Facebook pages. And I thought, well, I haven't seen this ever.
And you've been covering this forever. You've been there a long time. Yeah.
Well, not forever, but a long time. Okay. And so I started noticing that, and I started hearing stuff and my friends saying stuff. And so I dug a little bit deeper, and I think there is an anger. But it's a different situation here at the border because there's a lot of people who are U.S. citizens who live in Tijuana. This is a region. And I think there's a feeling that, wait, we're a region, we're partners. Why are you treating us like adversaries?
So people go back and forth. There's all sorts of commerce back and forth. Of course, NAFTA plays into it and all. And when you hear about the discussion nationwide or in the election campaign about border walls and treating immigrants who may be here without documentation differently, it's kind of a different situation in this particular region.
I don't think the border wall is a huge issue here in San Diego. A lot of people say we already have one, so what's the big deal? Sometimes we have a double wall or a triple in some cases. It's more like, what, you're going to ask Mexico to pay for it? And I think it's a question of attitudes than actual a fact about the wall.
So what are the high points? What are some of the specific things regarding the new administration that you're hearing from people in Tijuana, or people go back and forth about both sides of the border that are upsetting to them?
I think there's an uncertainty that's upsetting to a lot of people. A lot of people who cross with visas, for instance. There was a hysteria on whether people, there's a story in Mexican media that a woman had crossed with images of Trump on her cell phone, and because of that, they withdrew her tourist visa. Now, as far as I know, this has not been proven. This is not true. But it caused a huge sort of national fuss over this. And so people are nervous. People who cross are nervous.
And so, situations like this, people being people, there's rumors flying around, there's outrage, there's hyperbole, etc. And then there's, of course, facts and things that are actually happening.
Yes, like the boycott, right? The boycott last weekend.
Tell us about that. What was the genesis of that, and what actually happened?
Well, there was a call for a boycott. It's, a few hours for Mexico. And just from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. on Sunday, people were being asked through social media not to cross. The Tijuana Chamber of Commerce the president was supporting the idea of a boycott, but there's a lot of people in Tijuana who think that's the worst idea in the world because it polarizes the situation when, in fact, they say we should be gathering as a region to make our point known that we are very valuable to each other.
Mm-hmm. And talk a little bit about the complexity of this. I mean, if somebody's boycotting and some business is hurt, somebody else perhaps south of the border is helped because their business, I mean, there's a give and take on all of this, right?
Yes, I mean, maybe some small businesses would be benefited if people, go stay in Tijuana to do their shopping rather than cross. But just think of the Walmart in South San Diego. I think a lot of the employees live in Tijuana or the Las Americas shopping mall. Mm-hmm. So it's not so clear cut. Maybe you're hurting Mexicans who are on the San Diego side. We are so joined in such complex ways. Any boycott is going to have an odd effect.
Give us a sense of the scope, some of the bigger ballpark numbers on how much commerce there is and how joined we are economically.
Well, I can give you a figure that comes to mind is that there's 12 million people in the United States who are Mexican born, and they have 11.5 Mexican offspring. That's
11.5 million, yeah.
Yeah, so that's huge. I don't really have commerce figures but off the top of my head, but we are incredibly interdependent. SANDAG, as a matter of fact, is working on a study right now.
About that whole region.
I wonder what role the strength of the dollar has played in this also. I mean, if I'm a Mexican in Tijuana earning, very little in U.S. dollars at least, I might not need a political reason to cross the border and spend my money here.
That's true. I mean, the peso's value fell right after Trump, and now it's going up slightly.
Okay.
Yes, but there's certain things that people have traditionally crossed for, like to buy gasoline, to buy milk, or just to see your family.
All of which contributes to SANDAG's tax increases that we are desperately in need of the revenue from, I should add. But I wonder, so there was a, kind of a photo op event this week between Tijuana's mayor and San Diego's mayor. Does the show of solidarity that the two cities are trying to make, in spite of what's happening in D.C., provide any sort of solace to people in Mexico who are kind of feeling this swell of national pride?
I think there are some people who feel it does. What it does is it would send a signal to Washington, D.C. That's the hope, saying, look at us, we're a region. Some of the things you're saying are not helpful to us. So in that sense.
And the California leaders have done the same thing statewide here in supporting.
And it helps a Republican mayor saying this. I think it can't hurt.
Yeah. Now, you wrote a little bit about this week. There was a long history in Mexico of nationalism, but not so much in recent decades. That was with foreign wars and influence, the French and the Spanish, and of course the Mexican-American War. But it's been, you haven't seen that in recent decades until now.
No, it's really interesting. In recent decades, it's been softened just because of the integration of the U.S. and Mexican economies, the waves of migration to the U.S., so the situation has changed. And also one person told me previous nationalism was more like anti-U.S., and now it's sort of more focused as anti-Trump. I think people have a finer eye of what is happening.
All right, well, we'll certainly look forward to more stories as we go forward and what happens and watch the administration and their actions. We're going to shift gears now. Congressman Darrell Issa, who narrowly defeated his Democratic opponent in November, might not be known as an environmentalist. Yet this month, the Republican introduced a bill to protect our beachfront from the threat of nuclear waste. Jeff, let's start there. Just remind us quickly what happened to that ill-fated San Onofre plant and when did it shut down and why?
Well, the plant was undergoing an upgrade in 2012, and the equipment was faultily designed and failed in 2012. So the plant hasn't generated any power in 5 years. They've always had a plan to store the spent fuel, which is the leftover radioactive waste from the nuclear power generation process, in cooling ponds that are above ground. When the plant closed, the decision of what to do with that waste got put to the front burner, so to speak, because it was when they were going to upgrade the plant, it was supposed to last another 40 years. So what the utility, the major owner, Edison, decided to do was store the waste in canisters right on the beach next to the reactors that we all know when we drive up and down the Interstate 5. Some people criticized that decision, saying that it's maybe not the best idea to have 3 million pounds of nuclear waste in San Diego for years to come until a national repository can be developed.
Which is always, it's an ongoing debate and battle.
Yes, and that's where Darrell Issa, to his credit, has been one of the only local members of the congressional delegation to take on this issue.
And it's in his district.
Yes, and so what he's trying to do is establish through the Department of Energy a place that the waste could go that would be an alternate to the beach between, Oceanside and San Clemente. If you look, there's something like 8 million people that live within 50 miles of that waste, and there are a lot of problems that could come about from having the waste stored there in perpetuity.
Even what kind of problems?
The canisters are untested. They're a new design. They are vulnerable to saltwater intrusion, which is problematic because it's on the coast.
That seems like an issue.
Yeah.
There have been similar canisters employed at Diablo Canyon up north, and they've shown some evidence of wear after sooner. They're licensed for up to 20 years, but this waste is going to be stored for thousands of years.
Yeah, many thousands.
The idea is that the canisters could be moved if ever we get a national, repository. Also, there's no monitoring mechanism. They can test the air, but if they start leaking, we won't know until it's
They're
too
leaking,
late.
yeah.
So we have three-eyed fish swimming on our shores.
Yes, well, that could happen too.
Well, and you got earthquake faults and maybe a tsunami if you had some big terrible storm.
Yeah, it's a serious problem, and it's one that concerns a lot of people. Now, the California Coastal Commission granted the permit to build the facility that will store the casks, and we're talking about 100 giant canisters, concrete, steel lined, that are going to be partially buried. That agency has been sued by some environmentalists here in San Diego, and that case hasn't been decided yet. There's a hearing as soon as next month where the validity of the permit will come into question.
So they are burying, Edison is already in the process. What's the status of
They're transferring the fuel now into casks. And it's a long, mechanized, very detailed process where it's all robotic and giant cranes that are moving the canisters once they're filled. And then another concern is that the cooling ponds are going to be decommissioned. So there's no going back once this fuel is transferred. So some people are really concerned about that. The above-ground ponds have been a pretty satisfactory way of storing this stuff for years.
Okay. And odd marriage between Congressman Issa and environmentalists here? It seems like he's their new champion.
I think it's fair to say it's something of an odd marriage. The environmental community is excited to have somebody paying attention because they've been waving the red flag for years on this issue, and none of the local officials or statewide officials have taken on this issue. They're just seemingly too busy.
Any movement, any progress at all on getting this national repository a place to put this stuff permanently?
It depends how you would define progress. So most people would say no. It's all talk at this point. There have been a number of alternatives proposed over the years.
Specific places, yeah.
Yes, and billions of dollars expended to develop the site in Yucca Mountain that got put on hold under the Obama administration. Does
Issa suggest some places in his bill?
I don't believe he identifies specific places, no. There are a number of alternatives. It could be stored by private sector groups. It could be stored, some environmentalists are suggesting it be moved to more inland into places where there aren't 8
million people,
living within 50 miles.
And conveniently not near them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
in their district. Yeah. Now,
that's understandable.
I don't want it near me either.
Yeah. We do have not something you're really inviting into your community. We do have a short time left. There were a couple of other, and I know we can't get into detail on these and do a segment on each of them, but other high-stakes issues involving the shutdown of San Onofre, and give us an idea of some of the main ones that are going on. You got a criminal probe, Utilities Commission, and you've got the whole divvying up of who's going to pay for what, the shareholders or the ratepayers.
The criminal probe, it's been ongoing 2+ years. We have a new sheriff in town with the new attorney general. I know he's been approached by multiple parties into jump-starting that criminal case that Kamala Harris sort of
State Attorney General, we should say, yeah.
Yeah, a new state attorney general, yes. So that may breathe some new life into that. The settlement that saddled ratepayers with $3 or $4 billion in closure costs, that's being reviewed right now by the Public Utilities Commission, although they're being egged on by a federal lawsuit that has been certified and is moving forward. So they've been sort of directed to renegotiate that with some of the players who were not involved with the initial negotiations.
Okay, and then the California Public Utilities Commission itself has been under fire, and they're a target from various fronts, right?
Well, they have been under investigation, criminal investigation, for multiple years now, including current and former regulators. As I say, it's not clear where the criminal investigation is going. There have been some reform efforts that have been adopted, but more serious reform efforts keep getting pushed back.
Okay, and I'm sure you'll be updating us on all of this stuff and all the various fronts, and looks like you've got
yes, it's a gift that keeps giving.
A full-time job here for some time to come just on this topic and this issue. Well, that does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable, and I'd like to thank my guests, Andrew Keats of Voice of San Diego, Andrew Bowen of KPBS News, Sandra Dibble of the San Diego Union Tribune, and Jeff McDonald, also with the Union Tribune. A reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.